Hello, I'm Mike Mulvihill. In December of 2018, I completed a documentary on the life of Father Mychal Judge. It was called Father Mychal Judge, Victim 0001. On that recording, I spoke to George Healy, who knew Father Mychal Judge. Only a small section of that interview was used on the documentary. But on this recording, we hope to bring you the entire interview as recorded. I'm joined next on the phone line by George Healy from America, and George knew Father Mychal Judge. Hello, George.
Good morning, Michael. How are you, sir?
I'm very good, so I am, George. You knew Father Mychal Judge. Can you tell us how that came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I became a New York City fireman back in 1991, and roughly 3 years later, in 1994, there was a very tragic fire in New York that I operated at. Actually, in a twist of fate, because of staffing, I had worked in Ladder 5 on the day tour, and then later on in the evening, there was a fire that Ladder 5 operated at. And 3 of their members got very critically injured that evening. Those members were Captain John Drennan, Chris Siedenberg, and Jimmy Young. Unfortunately, they all got trapped in a staircase as the fire grew and developed, and were very critically burned. That evening, tragically, Chris and Jimmy passed. John Drennan, the captain, did not. He remained hospitalized for 40 days, but after those agonizing days for John in the hospital, tragically, infection would claim his life. And Mychal was one of our fire department chaplains, and Mychal was very involved with the firehouse and the families through this incident and this ordeal. And because of my connection to the incident, there'd be round-the-clock presence of the firemen at the hospital while John was being treated. And a lot of times, even during the night, on the overnight, I would travel up to the hospital to have some quiet moments. And quite often, I'd meet Father Mychal at the hospital, and he was just one of those persons that you were easily drawn to. He was a priest, but he was just a real down-to-earth human being and man, and really had a deep love and connection to the fire department. But, he was one of those priests that I don't know if it's appropriate to say, but it wasn't like, his priesthood or his collar got in his way. He would just talk and share and experience with you, really down on the human level.
Yeah, and I think that John Keeney may have summed it up when we spoke to him on the documentary, that he was a man of the people.
Oh, absolutely. He was one of us, So this tragedy unfolded over 40 days, and when John eventually passed, we went to the funeral, and there's 10,000 New York City firemen. So when we bury a firefighter, it's typically only a few select people get into the church, and everyone else would be outside. But this was a funeral that I knew I had to get into the church for. I had to experience it because of my connection. So I got into the church, and it was a very sad and challenging time, especially because of my connection. I had actually talked to Captain Drennan that night at about 6:00, and then later on in the evening around 7:30, he was critically injured, and then myself and other firefighters helped remove him from that building. So I was very connected to this incident, and to go to the funeral and to experience Mychal and Mychal's insight and Mychal's compassion, it really was was uplifting and inspirational. Like you said, he certainly was, excuse me, one of the people, one of the firefighters. It wasn't like he was talking to us. He was speaking with us, and he was suffering and expressing his own pain over the loss of a friend. And I walked out of the church that day thinking I could never hear a homily or a eulogy that would be as moving. But Mychal had a very unique way about him, and as the years went by, and I would unfortunately go to funerals for other firefighters, you'd hear Father Mychal speak, and I always remarked to myself that, well, he did it again. He outdid himself. He topped his last performance. To me, that was the way he was. He was just that sort of a person, dynamic, inspiring, but you felt his humanity. You felt his connection, his closeness. And to the point where at the time I was a fireman in Manhattan, and I would take the train to work early in the morning, and I was a younger man at the time. Quite often I would rollerblade to the firehouse, and as I would be rollerblading through the streets of Manhattan before Manhattan really came to life, it was quite often that I'd find Mychal out for a morning walk through the city, and I would stop alongside him and spend some time as he walked, and I was heading to the firehouse, and again, it was just always a sense of his connection, his real true identity as part of the fire department, and as, you know, just a fellow human being, and somebody who struggled in life and overcame and fell down, but got back up, and he was quite a gift.
Now, when you talked about, we'll say, the eulogy at his funeral, and a very sad moment that, would you have ever attended any masses that Father Mychal would have done and got to listen to his own eulogies during life?
You know, like I said, I mean, there were a number of occasions where I would hear him at other firefighters' funerals. I would, a lot of times, because of our work schedule, getting to Mass on a Sunday would be challenging, but, you know, Father Mychal's church right there on 31st Street in Manhattan was right outside of Penn Station. So on Saturday afternoons, they had a 4 o'clock Mass, which would allow me to attend Mass and then get to the firehouse for the start of our shift at 6 p.m. So quite often I would come in early, and periodically, you know, Father Mychal would be saying that Mass, and it would always be a wonderful thing. Like I said, on so many levels, I saw him and his interaction not only with the fire department, but with people of faith, and you know, the way he was, the way he touched people. It was really something. It was something special. He was certainly Father Mychal. He was certainly a person of faith and a religious figure. But he was a friend. He was a comrade. He was somebody that was, from the fire department's perspective, somebody in the trenches with us, and he was with us on our good days. He was with us on our worst days, and you know, he stood with us at churches. He stood with us at funerals, and like I always said, you know, the worst day for the New York City Fire Department was certainly 9/11, and it's not shocking to me that he stood with us that day also.
Yeah, and an emotional time, remembering that day, the loss of life, and I suppose by talking about it here, it brings it all back, and we can all still remember those images on TV and memories that will be with us forever. Your current role is Chief Fire Officer with the New York City Fire Department, George, and during that day on September 11th, 2001, you were out working that day?
Well, actually, I was at home. I was on vacation, but as the news began to unfold, everyone, of course, was directed to come into their firehouses and await orders and direction. And I was a young covering lieutenant at the time. I spent several years at Rescue Company 1 in Manhattan, which does the technical rescue. There's 5 rescue companies in New York, and they do the technical rescue. So, of course, an incident like the Trade Center collapse would be something where specialized resources were required. So when we got directed back into the city because of my former involvement with special operations and some additional training, I actually was able to go directly into the site that day because many people many firefighters were just directed to their firehouses to make sure there was adequate fire protection for the city. So probably by 11 o'clock or 11:30 that day, I was in Manhattan down at the Trade Center site, and it was a massive scene, of course, as everyone knows and realizes. And as you got there and started to understand and see the scope of those events, the word was already spreading that Father Mychal was our first casualty from that event, that you knew was just going to be, take a massive toll on the country and on the city and certainly on the New York City Fire Department. So again, I find it very fitting that he had been with us on most of our bad days, and on 9/11, which was the worst of the worst, he was right alongside us.
Yeah, and just thinking about that, the years going by, 2001 and 2011, 2021, there's now probably, generations who are only starting to learn about what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have young children. My oldest is 14. I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And my 14-year-old and my 11-year-old, certainly as the years have gone on, they've had a greater appreciation of really what 9/11 is and was and meant. My younger children, of course, don't. Something that we don't get to do every year, but we've done a couple of times as a family. One of the people that Mychal had become very, very close with, if you ever heard the stories, was Detective Stephen McDonald from the New York City Police Department. Back in 1986, he was critically wounded after a shooting event in Central Park, and he was a young husband. His wife was expecting, and Stephen was raced to the hospital with very serious wounds. And as the story goes, the first chaplain that arrived at the hospital was Father Mychal. So although he was the fire department chaplain, he was the nearest chaplain. And Father Mychal and Stephen developed a lifelong friendship and relationship. And Stephen, although paralyzed, lived for years, and Stephen was very passionate about his faith and about the rosary. And it was very often that you'd see Father Mychal and Stephen together. So one of the things that Stephen did after 9/11, and tragically Stephen passed away about a year and a half ago now. One of the things that Stephen McDonald did after 9/11 with a bunch of folks was they started a march from Mychal's parish that they do on the Sunday before 9/11 every year, and they say a mass and the rosary in the parish, and then they march down to the Trade Center, and they stop at various police stations and firehouses along the way and pray and say parts of the rosary. And there's a group here in the U.S., and the group is Mychal's Message. and Father Mychal had a prayer he used to say, and I think it just speaks to his humanity and his one with the people. And it's, Lord, take me where you want me to go. Let me meet who you want me to meet. Tell me what you want me to say, and keep me out of your way. And I think that really just speaks to his connection to God, and his connection to his own humanity, and just Mychal's effort to always do things right, but remember where he stands in the universe. And he was just the type of person that you met him. He had his big Irish smile and that Irish warmth, and I think you just couldn't help but be drawn to the man.
Now, just going back on that name, Stephen MacDonald, the New York City detective, I believe he was also the man who formally identified Father Mychal Judge's body on September 11th.
You know what? To be honest, that very well could be the fact. One of the kind of interesting dynamics for most New York City firefighters were we don't know a lot of the stories of 9/11 because we were involved in the rescue and the recovery, and not really watching the news media reports or reading the newspapers. So kind of for me, from a historical perspective, a lot of those types of stories I've never really come across, because those things were reported on and people knew about them. But for the firefighters and the police officers that were working down at the Trade Center site, and the military and the construction folks, months went by, and you had no connection to stuff like that. You were down at the site, you were operating, you were assisting and making recoveries, and the last thing you were thinking about doing when you got home was turning the news on and seeing reports about that site and the work that was going on. So that very well could be the case. Stephen and Mychal had a lifelong friendship, and that wouldn't surprise me in the least. But Stephen himself is a magnificent man, and his connection to Mychal and his connection to God and his faith, and the forgiveness that he extended to the young man that shot him, and holding no lasting
grudge, or
I'm looking for the right word here. I mean, he just extended to the boy total forgiveness for what he did to him, and I think the kinship between Mychal and Stephen and their faith together allowed them to walk through life together and overcome some of the challenges that life presents.
Would you have any more stories on Father Mychal himself?
You know what? As the years roll on, but again, I think it was, people I think quite often say you might not remember the exact words that people said, but you'll always remember surely how they made you feel. And Mychal was the type of man that, always made you feel at ease, always made you feel comforted, especially a lot of our connections in the fire department were with Mychal at times of pain and tragedy. And he was always that person that could cheer you up, that could put a smile on your face, that had that Irish charm and wit about him. And he also, we were up in Worcester, Mass. Years and years ago, there was 6 firefighters killed in a fire up there, and we met a Catholic priest who had met Mychal and spent some time with Mychal. And when he saw that we were New York firefighters, he right away came over and said, "Oh, can you say hello to my good friend Father Mychal?" And it would just spark those discussions, those stories, and it always would just put a smile on your face.
there's calls at the moment for Father Mychal to be a saint. Would you have any comment to make on that?
Well, I might be prejudiced. I would consider him a living saint. One of the firefighters that recently passed away from his personal struggles with cancer after 9/11, and tragically, the New York City Fire Department has seen a high toll of continuing illnesses and deaths due to the exposures that occurred down at the Trade Center site. And this particular firefighter, Ray Pfeiffer, who is a Manhattan firefighter and a friend of Father Mychal, his family put a shirt together and kind of Ray's thing was always do the right thing even when no one is watching. And, I think that would be something that I would say would be like a Father Mychal thing also. It was always a pleasure to know the man. He did the right thing by the New York City Fire Department. Like I said, I would see him in the hospital in the middle of the night when there was really only maybe a few firefighters there. And he was there for John Drennan and the Drennan family. But he was there for the firefighters. He was there to spend time with them because he knew that what they were going through at that hospital was not easy. It was taking a toll on them personally. It was taking a toll on their families. And, in my eyes, that's something that Mychal always did. He did the right thing even when not a lot of people were watching. He was just a real down-to-earth human being and a great man. And I would say that in my eyes, he was a walking saint. And I would find it very appropriate at some point if the church recognized his devotion to the FDNY and his devotion to his faith and his God and the work that he did for humanity.
And did he ever talk about Ireland, do you know, or his connections to this part of the world where we're talking about the Memorial Peace Garden in Keshcarrigan, County Leitrim? And by the way, just to add to that, a beautiful poem or beautiful prayer that you read a few minutes ago, and that prayer actually features on a memorial seat in the Father Mychal Judge Memorial Peace Garden in Keshcarrigan in County Leitrim, and a beautiful prayer.
Oh yeah, I wasn't aware of that. I'm sure as the years go by, I forget some of the stories, but he certainly was proud of his faith. He certainly was proud of his membership in the FDNY, and he certainly was proud of his Irish heritage.
Well, George, I'd like to thank you very much for talking to us, and I know that we'll probably only use a little part of the interview, but maybe what we might do is make it available as an extended interview, maybe on our website or something like that. But George Healy, of the Deputy Chief Fire Officer of the New York City Fire Department, thank you very much.
Thank you. It was an honor and a privilege to kind of walk down memory lane and remember Father Mychal and what he meant to us as a department and the members of the FDNY and myself personally. Thank you for the opportunity.
That's George Healy there, who knew Father Mychal Judge, and a very touching interview. That was the entire interview recorded for the Father Mychal Judge Victim 0001 documentary, which was completed in 2018. If you have a little look around, you should be able to find that documentary online to listen to. So, until next time, from myself, Mike Mulvihill, goodbye.